There's this powerful, almost invisible force that shapes whether a team succeeds or fails. It's the collective emotion of the group. And honestly, understanding this is a total game changer for any leader.
So let me ask you something. When you picture a team that's just absolutely crushing it, what do you think of? Raw talent? A huge budget? Maybe a brilliant strategy? Yeah, all that stuff is important for sure. But what if the most vital asset is something we barely ever talk about?
It's the team's shared emotional energy. Seriously, think about it. You can have a room full of geniuses, but if the vibe is toxic and full of distrust, they're going to fail. On the flip side, a team with real positive energy, they find creative ways to work together, they innovate, they push through tough times. Skills tell you what a team can do, but emotional energy, well, that tells you what they will do.
And you gotta understand, the stakes are super high here. When you ignore this stuff, it doesn't just vanish, it bubbles under the surface. All that unmanaged negativity leads straight to burnout, to infighting, to people just checking out. It is the silent killer of productivity.
Okay, so if we can't just ignore these emotions, what's the move? Well, that brings us to our first big idea, actively tuning the emotional tone. And let's be super clear, this is not about forcing everyone to be happy all the time. It's about being strategic.
There's actually a technical term for this. It's called team emotion regulation. And the most important word in that whole definition is deliberately. This is not a passive, hope for the best kind of thing. It's an active, conscious choice to shape your team's emotional landscape to actually help you hit your goals.
And you can break this down into 3 main pillars. First, there's mood management, making sure the team's mood actually fits the task at hand. Then there's leadership regulation, how the leader's own emotions set the tone. And finally, affective climate, which is the overall emotional vibe of the place. We're going to really dig into those last 2 because they are so deeply tied to the leader's role.
So let's build on that. I want you to think of a leader not just as a manager, but as an emotional architect. Someone who is literally designing and building the foundation of the team's morale.
And hey, this isn't just some fluffy, feel-good idea. It is backed by some serious research. Studies by a researcher named Barsade found that emotions are literally contagious at work. They spread like a cold, and they almost always spread from the top down. A leader's positivity can energize an entire team, just as easily as their stress can infect everyone. You just can't avoid having that influence.
So, how does an architect actually do this? Well, it really boils down to a few key actions. First, they frame challenges in an optimistic way, turning a scary deadline into an exciting mission. Second, they show real empathy. They actually acknowledge when people are having a tough time instead of just barking about results. And third, they're constantly giving supportive feedback and recognition. These aren't just soft skills, okay? They are fundamental tools for leadership.
All right, now let's zoom out a bit. A leader's actions, they don't just exist in a bubble. They all contribute to that third pillar we mentioned earlier, the overall climate. This is where all those small individual actions add up to create a collective reality.
And that's what we call the affective climate. It's basically the emotional weather inside your organization. Is it generally hopeful and inspired, or is it tense, maybe a little fearful? This shared feeling is the sum total of thousands of daily interactions, and it has a huge impact on everything from creativity to whether people stick around.
So what builds a great climate? Well, it starts with leadership consistency. Your team needs to know what to expect from you emotionally. That gets stronger with transparent communication, especially when things are tough. And when you have both of those, you create psychological safety. That amazing feeling that you can speak up or even mess up without being afraid you'll get crushed.
Okay, all this theory is great, but what does it actually look like when the pressure is on? Let's walk through a real-world example of 2 very different leaders handling the exact same crisis.
So picture this. A company's going through a massive, stressful reorganization. Leader A, our architect, jumps right in. They start holding weekly check-ins, they openly say, hey, I know this is uncertain, and they work to frame the change as a new opportunity. Meanwhile, you've got leader B, the avoider. This leader basically sticks their head in the sand. They only talk about tasks, they dodge any emotional questions, and they just cross their fingers hoping all the bad feelings will magically disappear.
And the outcome? Well, it's pretty much exactly what you'd expect, but the difference is just staggering. Leader A's team, yeah, they were still stressed, but their anxiety was lower, trust was higher, and their performance held steady.
Leader B's team, engagement completely tanked. Mistrust and fear went through the roof. It's just a crystal clear example of how emotional leadership directly impacts the bottom line.
So let's bring all this home. What does it all mean for you right now? The truth is, every single leader, heck, every single team member leaves an emotional fingerprint on their environment.
So here's what you really need to remember. First, you can't suppress emotions on a team. They are information that you have to manage. Second, leaders, you are the thermostat for the team's emotional tone. Your behavior sets the temperature. Third, when you actively manage the mood, you're not just being nice, you are building resilience. And finally, creating a healthy affective climate isn't some fluffy perk. It is a powerful strategic advantage.
Which really just leaves us with one last question to chew on. Whether you're leading 100 people or you're a member of a team of 3, your actions, your words, your energy, they all contribute to the climate. So just take a second and think about it. What emotional climate are you creating today?